The soft hum of Rebecca's car filled the air as she and Jaden drove through the quiet suburbs. It had been a month since the day in court that changed everything. The day Jaden had revealed the truth that shattered Rebecca's carefully constructed world. Now, as they sat side by side, the silence between them felt heavy, filled with unspoken words and lingering uncertainties. Rebecca glanced over at Jaden. He was staring out the window, his chin resting in his hand, his expression unreadable. "You doing okay?" she asked hesitantly, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Jaden shrugged without looking at her. "Yeah, I guess." Rebecca bit her lip, unsure of what to say next. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between them, but every time she tried, she felt like she was walking on eggshells. A newfound relationship was fragile, and she was terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. They pulled into the driveway of Rebecca's house, a large two-story home with a perfectly manicured lawn and flower beds that looked like they had been arranged by a professional. Jaden's eyes flicked over the house, his expression tightening. Rebecca noticed his reaction and felt a pang of guilt. "I know it's a lot," she said softly. Jaden didn't respond. He climbed out of the car, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and followed Rebecca to the front door. As she unlocked it and stepped inside, she turned to him with a nervous smile. "Welcome home," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Jaden stepped inside, his sneakers squeaking against the polished hardwood floor. He glanced around, taking in the pristine living room with its leather furniture, framed art, and shelves lined with books. Everything about the house felt expensive and untouchable. So different from the foster homes he had grown up in, where mismatched furniture and worn-out carpets were the norm. Rebecca watched him carefully, her heart sinking as she saw the discomfort etched on his face. "I know it's not what you're used to," she said gently, "but I want you to feel at home here. If there's anything you need, just tell me, okay?" Jaden nodded, but didn't say anything. He dropped his backpack near the couch and stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, unsure of where he fit in this new, unfamiliar world. That evening, Rebecca cooked dinner, a simple meal of spaghetti and garlic bread, hoping to make things feel less overwhelming. She set the table in the dining room, lighting a small candle for ambiance. When she called Jaden to dinner, he appeared in the doorway, his hands shoved into the pockets of his hoodie. He sat down across from her, his eyes fixed on his plate as she served the food. "This was my favorite meal when I was your age," Rebecca said, trying to start a conversation. Jaden looked up briefly, his expression unreadable. "Thanks," he mumbled, before twirling some spaghetti onto his fork. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the clinking of silverware the only sound in the room. Rebecca felt the tension growing with every passing second, and finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "Jaden," she said softly, "I know this is all new, and I don't want to rush you, but I really want to get to know you. I want to understand what you've been through, what you like, what makes you happy." Jaden froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, his shoulders tensing. "You want to know what makes me happy?" he asked, his voice laced with bitterness. "How about not being abandoned?" Rebecca's breath caught in her throat, the words hitting her like a punch to the chest. She opened her mouth to respond, but Jaden didn't give her the chance. "You think cooking me dinner is gonna fix everything?" he continued, his voice rising. "You can't just show up after all these years and expect everything to be okay." "I know that," Rebecca said quickly, her voice shaking. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, Jaden. I just want to try." Jaden pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs scraping against the floor. "I don't even know why I'm here," he muttered. "I don't belong in this house, or your life." He grabbed his backpack and stormed out of the dining room, leaving Rebecca sitting alone at the table. She stared at his untouched plate, tears welling up in her eyes. For a long time she sat in silence, replaying his words in her mind. She knew this wouldn't be easy. She had prepared herself for anger and resentment, but hearing the pain in his voice was almost unbearable. Finally she stood and began clearing the table, her movements slow and deliberate. As she scraped Jaden's uneaten food into the trash, she made a silent vow to herself. No matter how difficult it was, she wouldn't give up on him. Upstairs, Jaden sat on the edge of the guest bed, his backpack still clutched in his lap. The room was clean and spacious, with soft bedding and a window that overlooked the quiet street. But to him, it felt like a stranger's space, cold and unfamiliar. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over Gloria's number. She was the only person who had ever felt like family to him, and part of him wanted to call her, to tell her he'd made a mistake by coming here. But as he sat there, another thought crept into his mind, one he wasn't ready to admit yet. Deep down, he wanted Rebecca's words to be true. He wanted her to care, to fight for him, to prove that she was different from all the others who had let him down. For now, though, he wasn't ready to let his guard down. He leaned back on the bed, staring at the ceiling as tears slid silently down his cheeks. The next morning, the air in the house was thick with unspoken tension. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She glanced at the clock, wondering if Jaden would come downstairs for breakfast. She had barely slept, her mind replaying their conversation from the night before. His words, "I don't belong in this house or your life," had cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She had spent her entire career learning how to handle difficult situations with composure. But nothing had prepared her for this. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. Jaden appeared in the doorway, still wearing the same hoodie from the night before, his face guarded. Rebecca forced a smile. "Good morning," she said softly. Jaden didn't respond. He walked to the fridge, grabbed a carton of orange juice, and poured himself a glass. Without a word, he sat at the table across from her, sipping quietly. Rebecca took a deep breath, trying to summon the courage to break the silence. "I was thinking," she began hesitantly, "that maybe we could do something together today. Just the two of us." Jaden raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "Like what?" "Well," Rebecca said, trying to keep her tone light, "I know there's a basketball court at the park down the street. I thought maybe we could shoot some hoops." Jaden snorted, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You play basketball?" Rebecca chuckled nervously. "I might surprise you. I wasn't half bad in college." Jaden's smirk faded, and his walls went back up. "I don't know," he muttered. "I'm not really in the mood." Rebecca's heart sank, but she nodded. "That's okay," she said gently. "We don't have to. But if you change your mind, just let me know." Jaden shrugged, his gaze drifting toward the window. He could feel her watching him, her nervous energy filling the room, and it made him want to crawl out of his own skin. Finally, he pushed his chair back and stood. "I'm gonna go for a walk," he said, grabbing his hoodie and heading toward the door. "Wait," Rebecca called after him, standing quickly. "Where are you going? Do you want me to drive you somewhere?" Jaden shook his head. "I just need some space," he said, avoiding her eyes. Rebecca opened her mouth to protest but stopped herself. "Okay," she said softly. "Just be safe. And let me know if you need anything." Jaden nodded curtly and stepped outside, letting the door click shut behind him. Jaden wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, his hands shoved into his pockets. The houses around him were big and beautiful, with freshly mowed lawns and shiny cars parked in the driveways. It all felt so far removed from the life he knew. As he walked, his thoughts drifted to the foster homes he had lived in over the years, small, cramped houses with peeling paint and broken appliances. He thought about the foster parents who had promised to take care of him, but had only ever treated him like a burden. And now, here he was, living in a house that looked like something out of a magazine, with a woman who claimed to want him in her life. But how could he trust her? How could he trust anyone? Jaden kicked a rock down the sidewalk, frustration bubbling inside him. He didn't know what he wanted, but he knew he didn't feel like he belonged here. Back at the house, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty spot where Jaden had been. She felt helpless, like she was trying to hold on to something that was slipping through her fingers. She pulled out her phone and hesitated for a moment before dialing a number. After a few rings, Gloria's warm voice came through the line. "Rebecca," Gloria said. "How are things going?" "How are?" Rebecca let out a shaky sigh. "Not great," she admitted. "I feel like I'm failing him. He's so angry, and I don't know how to reach him." Gloria's tone softened. "It's not about fixing everything overnight," she said. "Jaden's been through a lot, and it's going to take time for him to feel safe enough to let you in." "I know," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "But it's so hard. I want to do this right, but I feel like I'm just making things worse." "You're not," Gloria assured her. "The fact that you care, that you're trying, means more to him than you realize. He may not show it, But deep down, he knows you're here for him. Rebecca wiped at her eyes, nodding even though Gloria couldn't see her. I just want him to know that I'm not going anywhere, she said softly. And he will, Gloria said. But you have to give him space to come to that realization on his own. Keep showing up for him even when it's hard. That's how you build trust. Rebecca took a deep breath, Gloria's words settling in her chest. Thank you, she said. I don't know what I'd do without your support. That's what I'm here for, Gloria said warmly. You've got this, Rebecca. Just take it one step at a time. As Rebecca hung up, she felt a renewed sense of determination. Jaden might not be ready to open up yet, but she wasn't going to give up on him. A few hours later, Jaden returned to the house. He walked inside quietly, half expecting Rebecca to bombard him with questions about where he had been. But to his surprise, she was sitting on the couch with a book in her hands, giving him a small, tentative smile. Hey, she said gently. How was your walk? Jaden shrugged. It was fine. Rebecca nodded. Dinner's in the fridge if you're hungry, she said. No pressure, just wanted you to know. Jaden paused, glancing at her before heading toward the stairs. He didn't say anything, but her calm demeanor made him feel something unfamiliar. Relief. For the first time he wondered if maybe, just maybe, Rebecca really meant what she had said. The days passed slowly, with Rebecca and Jaden navigating the uneasy rhythm of their new life together. Their interactions were polite but distant, each of them afraid to take the first step toward something deeper. Rebecca found herself constantly second-guessing her words, worried that one wrong move might push Jaden further away. Jaden, for his part, remained guarded. He kept to himself, spending most of his time in the guest room or wandering the neighborhood. But beneath his quiet demeanor, he was watching Rebecca closely, testing her consistency, waiting to see if she would follow through on her promises. One afternoon, Rebecca decided to take a chance. She knocked gently on Jaden's door, her heart pounding in her chest. Jaden, she called softly. Do you have a minute? There was a pause before Jaden's muffled voice replied. Yeah, I guess. Rebecca opened the door cautiously and found him sitting cross-legged on the bed, earbuds in and a notebook open in front of him. He pulled out one earbud and looked up at her with a wary expression. I was cleaning out the garage earlier, Rebecca said, holding up a dusty basketball, and I found this. Thought maybe you'd want to shoot some hoops. Jaden stared at the ball, his face unreadable. For a moment, Rebecca thought he was going to say no, but then he shrugged. Sure, he said, setting his notebook aside. Rebecca smiled, trying not to let her relief show. Great. I'll meet you outside. The basketball court at the neighborhood park was empty, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Jaden dribbled the ball idly, his movements slow and deliberate. Rebecca stood a few feet away, watching him with a mix of nervousness and hope. You've got a good handle, she said, trying to break the silence. Did you play a lot in school? Jaden nodded. Sometimes, when I wasn't switching homes anyway. Rebecca winced at the mention of his past, but forced herself to keep the conversation going. Well, let's see what you've got, she said, holding out her hands. Come on, show me your best shot. Jaden raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. You sure about that? You're kind of old. Rebecca laughed, her nerves easing a bit. Careful, or I might show you just how old I am. Jaden dribbled the ball a few times before taking a shot. The ball arced gracefully through the air and swished cleanly through the hoop. Nice, Rebecca said, clapping. All right, my turn. Jaden passed her the ball, and Rebecca squared up, focusing on the hoop. She took a shot, and the ball bounced off the rim with a loud clunk. Jaden couldn't help but laugh. You're definitely rusty. Rebecca grinned, retrieving the ball. Give me a break. It's been a while. They played for nearly an hour, their laughter echoing across the empty court. Rebecca wasn't great, but she didn't care. She was just happy to see Jaden smiling, even if it was only for a little while. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Jaden sat on the edge of the court, sipping from a water bottle Rebecca had brought. She sat beside him, her legs stretched out in front of her. You're good at this, Rebecca said, glancing at him. Do you ever think about playing on a team again? Jaden shrugged. I don't know. I used to like it, but I guess it doesn't feel the same anymore. Rebecca nodded, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. Why not? She asked gently. Jaden hesitated, picking at the label on his water bottle. When you're always moving around, it's hard to get attached to stuff. You don't know if you'll still be there tomorrow. Rebecca's chest tightened at his words. She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to worry about that anymore, she said softly. You're not going anywhere, Jaden. I promise. Jaden looked at her. His expression conflicted. He wanted to believe her, but the scars of his past made it hard to trust. You say that now, he muttered. I say it because I mean it, Rebecca said firmly. I know I've let you down before, but I'm not going to do that again. You're stuck with me, whether you like it or not. A faint smile crossed Jaden's face, and for the first time, he felt a small flicker of hope. We'll see, he said, his tone teasing, but not unkind. That night, back at the house, Jaden surprised Rebecca by joining her in the living room. He sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone while she read a book. Hey, Judge, he said suddenly, using the nickname he had given her. Rebecca looked up, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, thanks for today, he said quietly, not looking at her. It was fun, Rebecca smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. You're welcome, Jaden. Any time. In that moment, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't dared to hope for, a connection, however fragile, that could grow into something real. The following week brought a mix of small victories and familiar struggles. Jaden's walls were still firmly in place, but cracks were beginning to show. He no longer avoided Rebecca entirely, joining her for meals, and even lingering in the living room after dinner. They didn't talk much, but Rebecca cherished these small moments of progress. One evening, while Rebecca was sorting through old files in her study, she came across a small, battered envelope tucked inside a folder. Her heart skipped a beat as she pulled it out, her fingers trembling. It was a letter, one she had written years ago but never sent. The memory hit her like a wave. It was a letter addressed to Jaden, written when he was only 2 years old. She had poured her heart into it, trying to explain why she had given him up and how much she hoped he would have a better life, but fear and guilt had kept her from sending it. Instead, it had sat in a drawer, forgotten, while Jaden grew up without knowing she cared. Rebecca stared at the letter, tears blurring her vision. She didn't know if showing it to Jaden would help or hurt, but something deep inside her told her it was time to face the past, no matter how painful it might be. The next day, Rebecca waited until Jaden was sitting at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly flipping through his phone. She took a deep breath and sat across from him, the letter clutched in her hand. Jaden, she began softly. There's something I want to show you. He glanced up, his expression wary. What is it? Rebecca hesitated, her throat tightening. She set the letter on the table and slid it toward him. It's something I wrote a long time ago. For you, Jaden frowned, picking up the envelope. He opened it cautiously, pulling out the folded piece of paper inside. As he began to read, his face shifted through a range of emotions. Confusion, sadness, anger. The letter read, Dear Jaden, I don't know if you'll ever see this, but I need to say it anyway. Giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. Not a day goes by that I don't think about you, wondering if you're happy, if you're safe, if you know how much I love you. I was young and scared, and I thought I was doing what was best for you. But now all I can do is hope that someday you'll understand. You are not a mistake, Jaden. You are my greatest gift, and I will always carry you in my heart. Love. Mom. When Jaden finished reading, he looked up at Rebecca, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and disbelief. Why didn't you send this? He asked, his voice trembling. Rebecca's hands twisted together in her lap. I was scared, she admitted. I thought maybe it would only make things harder for you, or that you wouldn't want to hear from me. Jaden's jaw tightened, and he looked back down at the letter. You could have tried, he said quietly. Even if it didn't make things better, at least I would have known you cared. I know, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. And I'll regret not sending it for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, Jaden, and I want to make things right. Jaden folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. He stared at it for a long moment before speaking again. You wrote this when I was 2, he said. Did you ever think about me after that? Rebecca reached across the table, her hand trembling as it rested near his. "Every day," she said. "Every single day, Jaden. You've always been in my heart, even when I was too afraid to face the truth." For the first time, Jaden let his guard slip. His shoulders sagged, and tears began to spill down his cheeks. "I just wanted to know why," he whispered. "Why you didn't want me." Rebecca's heart broke at his words. She moved around the table, kneeling beside him. "It was never that I didn't want you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I wanted you to have everything I couldn't give you. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Jaden wiped at his tears, his expression conflicted. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he admitted. Rebecca nodded, her own tears falling freely. "I understand," she said. "But I'll be here whenever you're ready. I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment they sat in silence, the letter resting on the table between them. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start, a fragile step toward healing the wounds that had kept them apart for so long. Later that night, Jaden sat alone in his room, the letter clutched in his hands. He read it again and again, the words sinking into his heart. Part of him still felt angry, but another part, a quieter, softer part, wanted to believe Rebecca's words. He didn't know if he was ready to forgive her, but for the first time, he thought maybe he could try. The next morning was unusually quiet. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The letter she had given Jaden weighed heavily on her mind. She replayed their conversation over and over, second-guessing every word she had said. When she heard footsteps approaching, she looked up to see Jaden shuffling into the kitchen. He was still in his pajamas, his hair slightly tousled, and the envelope she'd given him was clutched tightly in his hand. "Good morning," Rebecca said softly, unsure of how to gauge his mood. Jaden didn't respond right away. He placed the letter on the table and sat across from her, his expression unreadable. "I read it again," he said quietly, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the envelope. Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding. "And?" Jaden hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. "It's hard," he admitted. "Reading what you wrote, it makes me feel two things at the same time. Part of me wants to believe it, to think that you really did care about me. But the other part," he trailed off, struggling to find the words. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "The other part feels angry," she finished for him. Jaden nodded, his shoulders slumping. "Yeah, it's like, if you cared so much, why didn't you fight for me? Why didn't you come back?" Rebecca's chest tightened, and she swallowed the lump in her throat. "I can't change what I did, Jaden," she said, her voice trembling. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness right now. But I hope, over time, I can show you that I'm here for you now. That I'm not going anywhere." Jaden stared at her for a long moment, his expression conflicted. It's hard to trust that," he said. Rebecca nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand, and I'm willing to earn your trust, no matter how long it takes." Jaden looked down at the envelope again, his fingers tracing its edges. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," he said. "But I want to try." Rebecca's breath caught, and she blinked back tears. "That's all I can ask for," she said softly. "Thank you, Jaden, for giving me a chance." Later that day, Rebecca suggested they spend some time together outside the house. Jaden was reluctant at first, but when she mentioned visiting the local community center, he perked up slightly. The center was bustling with activity when they arrived. Kids were playing basketball in the gym, while others worked on art projects in a brightly lit room nearby. Jaden's eyes lit up when he saw the basketball court, and Rebecca smiled, glad to see him show some enthusiasm. "Go ahead," she encouraged. "I'll watch from the sidelines." Jaden nodded and jogged onto the court, quickly joining a group of boys around his age. Rebecca watched as he dribbled the ball with ease, his movements fluid and confident. For the first time in weeks, she saw him smiling, a genuine, carefree smile that warmed her heart. As Jaden played, Rebecca struck up a conversation with a woman sitting beside her on the bleachers. The woman, a volunteer named Marsha, explained that the center offered mentorship programs for kids in the foster system. "We try to give them a safe place to connect with others and learn new skills," Marsha said. "It's amazing what a difference it can make in their lives." Rebecca's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe this was what Jaden needed, not just her support, but a community where he could feel understood and valued. When Jaden finished playing, he walked over to Rebecca, wiping sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his hoodie. "You were watching?" he asked, a hint of pride in his voice. "Of course," Rebecca said with a smile. "You're really good out there." Jaden shrugged, but the faintest smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Hey," Rebecca said gently. "The woman I was talking to told me about some mentorship programs here. I thought maybe, if you're interested, we could check them out together." Jaden's brow furrowed. "Well," Rebecca said, "there's one for kids who like basketball. They pair you with older players who can help you improve your skills and maybe even get noticed by school teams or recruiters. There's also an art program, if that's more your thing." Jaden thought about it for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe the basketball one," he said. Rebecca's heart swelled with relief. "Okay," she said. "We'll look into it." That evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Rebecca glanced at Jaden out of the corner of her eye. He seemed more relaxed than she had seen him in weeks, his guard lowered just a bit. "Hey," she said softly. Jaden looked over at her. "Yeah? I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you," she said, "for opening up, even when it's hard. You're stronger than you know." Jaden looked down, his cheeks flushing slightly. "Thanks," he mumbled. Rebecca smiled, her heart full. It wasn't perfect, and she knew they still had a long way to go. But for the first time, she felt like they were truly moving forward, one step at a time.